Now that we know our unit circle, we're going to be using that as we look kind of at our graphs of our trig functions. In our next chapter, we're going to be solving our trig functions. So for today, we're looking at the graphs. This is just an intro, and we're just doing bare bones graphing, just so we can get used to seeing it, what it looks like, and then we're going to go ahead and start changing it. So let's start with our sine wave here. So sine and cosine, these are called periodic functions. As we rotate around the unit circle, and we're going through all of our ratios, as we keep rotating, we just keep repeating, right? So that's what makes it periodic, is that repetition. So what's happening here is our y-axis is now going to represent our ratio values, and our x-axis is going to represent our angles of rotation. We're going to be doing this in radians, so hopefully you're prepared for that. We're going to just go ahead, we're going to call this one our 90 degree pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. And we're going to see what happens with our sine wave. If you remember pieces from your unit circle, I want to know what the sine of 0 degrees is, and that's 0. The sine of pi over 2 is 1. The sine of pi is 0. The sine of 3 pi over 2 is -1. And the sine of 2 pi is 0. So we've kind of got these random dots, and we've got to figure out how we're going to connect the dots. But if we were to go through and add just a couple more points here, we know the sine of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2, which is about 0.7. So we could put it about here. Same thing's going to happen in the second quadrant. When we jump to the third quadrant, it's now negative. And in the fourth quadrant, it's also negative. So we're starting to see a little bit more of that shape coming out. If we were to connect our points now, they're going to look something like this. And from here, from 0 to 2 pi, this is one complete cycle of sine. And that's what we're going to be looking for and dealing with. This cycle, where we have all of our positive values, all of our negative values. Sine is now just going to repeat from here on out as it rotates around our unit circle. So like I said, this is one cycle of sine. This cycle completed in 2 pi, so it has a period length of 2 pi. Or 360 degrees. We're going to see a sine wave every 2 pi radians, every 360 degrees, okay? We notice the maximum and minimum, 1 and -1. We have an amplitude of 1. The amplitude is how far above or below this midline that we go. So I'm going to call this the midline, where our zeros are. So we go 1 above, 1 below, because the amplitude is 1. Bare bones basics of our sine wave. Let's go ahead and look at cosine now. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to have our pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi, and we're going to pull these values off of our unit circle. So the cosine at 0 is 1. At pi over 2, it's 0. At pi, it's -1. At 3 pi over 2, it's 0. And back to 2 pi, we're back at 1. Again, if we were just to go and fill this out a little bit more, because right now it's kind of a V shape, so we want to make that look a little bit cleaner, we could go in and do our pi over 4s. So we have our root 2 over 2. In the second quadrant, it's negative. In the third quadrant, it's negative. And in the fourth, it's back positive. So we're seeing maybe a little bit more of that curvy nature. And our cosine looks something like this. Again, we're completing one cycle right here when we hit the 2 pi. So the period length for cosine is also 2 pi. Again, it's going one above and one below. So it too has an amplitude of 1. So we have our sine wave and our cosine wave. The cool thing is, if I were to come in and cover just this first part of our sine, we're seeing cosine. Sine and cosine are just a shift, one to the other. And I'll show you that on our next video when I can get a little bit more visual. I'm going to try to use the TV here. So hopefully this kind of is a good intro. We can kind of see our trig going on. And now that we know it, we're going to change it. Stick around, see what happens.